I'll kind of follow this up later. So please feel free to ask any questions you want to, or I can read it off the text chat if you prefer. So we're going to hop skipping through this as we've got a slide deck for you, but I think what's more interesting is actually having some discussion. So I will try and skip through this as much as I can. But it's also worth bearing in mind that the guidance is there as well on the CMALT website, and I'll find the link and I'll make sure that gets sent out afterwards, because it can be a bit difficult to find the exact link to the guidance, and there are 3 sets of guidance depending on what portfolio type you're looking at, and that's just because there are different sections in different portfolios. So I'll try and cover that as well. So to start with, then the framework, as you should all be familiar with, has 3 different categories and 3 pathways essentially you can assess. And anyone who's got a CMALT certification can be an assessor, and it's something we actually encourage everyone to do. It shows that you remain in good standing, so it's great that you're here and that you want to assess. And this 3-year portfolio reviews, they are very much light touch. You don't have to go through the same process again. And you can actually be assessing portfolio reviews as well as full portfolios, and it's just a slightly different experience. There's a slightly different set of criteria. I wouldn't worry too much about 3-year portfolio reviews at this stage. If you get to one of those and you're not sure how to sort of engage with that, just have a chat with CMALT people and we'll sort it out. The reason why I say that is that this structure is very different, so it's a bit difficult to sort of to go through that in the same way. So we're just going to focus on the standard portfolios that you will see coming through. And one of the things that I probably should point out is that we have got a structure that's based on associate, standard, and senior, but there are some core principles that go throughout all of them, and those are the things that I will try and sort of emphasize today. I suppose for me, if you don't know who I am, so I'm one of the trustees of ALT, but I've also been a CMALT assessor for over 10 years. I think it's 12 or 13 years now. And I also chair the CMALT committee in my role as a trustee. So I'm very much vested in this as an accreditation scheme for our members, but for people in our profession. And I think this is what makes it really interesting, is that each of these different levels reflects a different level of engagement with our profession. So in your case, I know, as an academic, as a teacher, as someone who is using learning technology at the chalk face, so to speak, this is equally applicable to you as it is to someone who is in the formal learning technologist role. And I think that's what makes this so interesting. When you're an assessor, you get to see that full breadth of our profession, all the different roles, all the different ways that learning technology is used in education. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about this being a peer-based accreditation scheme. So on to just a summary of the assessment process. We have opportunities for people to submit their portfolios whenever they like. So we used to have a particular dates in the diary, but now people can submit their portfolios whenever they like. And the key thing is that we were trying to get the portfolios back to people within 20 weeks. 20 weeks is actually quite a long time. And it actually helps if you've got an email coming in, say, could you assess this portfolio? Get back to ALT if you can't do it within a short space of time. You can all remember, and so I can remember being in the position where you submit it and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. So just put yourselves in that candidate's point of view. The amount of time and effort and investment that's gone into that portfolio. That's why we really want to make sure we get them back quicker than 20 weeks. And I'll go through what it means about in terms of different rounds of that as well. So submission is now at any point, and what will happen is you'll get a request to indicate when you're available to take some submissions. So every few months, an email comes out from ALT saying, are you available to take any portfolios over the next 3 months? And just say yes or no, and it's absolutely fine. You don't have to take it. You can take 1, you can take 10, whatever you fancy doing. So just bear with me. Just try and check what this slide is telling. I'm not too worried about it. So onto assessment timeline then. First checks are done by ALT. They'll make sure that the portfolio actually, the link that's submitted actually works. It's got all the sections complete. We do get some portfolios that slip through the net, and if there's a section missing, we normally bounce that back to ALT to follow up to the candidate directly. We want to make sure that we're giving everyone the best possible opportunities to succeed. So we won't formally fail someone if they've got a whole chunk, like a whole section missing. We'll go back to them and say, it looks like you've got a bit missing here. Could you just check that before you submit? That's only fair, and it also means that when we're assessing, we've got a full picture of that candidate rather than the section that's missing too. So there's some checks that go on early doors, and then we have a round of assessment that you do independently. So there's normally 2 assessors on a portfolio. You do your assessment independently, separately. You submit your scores, and then you find out who the other assessor is, and you compare your scores. And if there's a difference, that's when the interesting conversations happen. And really drilling down into why a candidate may or may not have achieved different criteria. And that discussion is really useful. And this is the value of the peer, the 2-peer review exercise, because you can actually get to reflect on your own biases sometimes. You can get to reflect on how you're viewing a particular candidate rather than what work they do. So there's some real useful checks that you have in that conversation to make sure that you're not being overly harsh, but also when you're thinking about the feedback you provide to that candidate, having that peer discussion helps, because then you can agree your feedback and ensure that candidate, when they receive that feedback, is getting the same message, or they're not being given very conflicting feedback, because that's the worst thing you can receive as a candidate, where you've got one assessor that says absolutely fantastic and another assessor that says this needs a lot more reflection, a lot more work. So this whole idea of 2 people coming together and agreeing what's the joint story we're going to send back to that candidate is so important, and I cannot emphasize that enough. So even if you both disagree, there's another route. We normally bring in a third assessor, or if perhaps you have both said that it's not a pass, but you've got different reasons why it's not a pass. Again, thinking about, well, how do we want to focus that candidate's time to get it to a pass? So don't give them too much to do. What's going to actually really help them? I always view CMALT as being a development exercise. This is about supporting colleagues in our profession to be the best they can be. I don't see this as a tick box exercise at all. This is really about thinking of how can I best enable this professional to reflect our profession in the best possible way. And that might be just even if it's just about supporting their reflective writing. So they get to take a bit more time to reflect, look a bit more at where they want to do something differently, and just get them to articulate that. Because as professionals in this sector, that's something we really need to do. We need to be able to justify our decisions. We need to be able to explain our thinking to people that we work with, and this process actually helps individuals to do that. And I've seen that as portfolios have come back from resubmission, real marked difference in how someone's engaged with their professional practice. And I think that's one of the real benefits of being an assessor as well. We've got a lot, I would say as well, we've probably got a lot more work we could do to support candidates very early on in terms of that process of articulating their approach and reflecting on their practice before they get to the point of submission. And that reflection is one of those things that we often don't pass portfolios on. And I think there's something there about, well, how do we support that more broadly within our sector? Anyway, I'm taking too long on this. So that's the process. And you come with an outcome, whether it's a pass or a referral. Referral means an invitation to resubmit. And then typically the candidate resubmission will come back to the same assessors. It's not always the case, but it helps if it does, because it does mean that you can see very clearly the change in submission. So I've already mentioned about availability. You get an email that comes out, and the timeline there. There's just a couple of indications of really we want to get the the first assessment done where you're doing it independently within the first 4 weeks. So you've got a bit of time to then liaise with the other assessor before it then goes back. But again, we advertise a 20-week window. It'd be great if we can get all these portfolios back in under 10 weeks, really. Really just help the candidates. Right, now to the nuts and bolts. Every section and each set of portfolios will have a slightly different range of sections based on whether they're associate, standard, or senior. But every section, so whether that's 1A, 1B, 1C, has to be meeting these three broad requirements: description, reflection, and evidence. And what I do is I actually have a document separate where I've got 1A and I'm either ticking off the D, R, and E, the description, reflection, and evidence. If they don't have all three, they can't then show me that they've completed that section. So sometimes we get some really good description, but no reflection. I'm actually seeing more and more portfolios coming through without all the evidence they need, or the evidence isn't strong enough. And that's something that obviously needs to be called out in the feedback. This is a portfolio practice. It's not a narrative about your professional life history. So, I want to see the things that you've done. I want to see the evidence. And the key thing here is, does the evidence support that section? Does it support their description? One of the things I've seen more often is people just putting emails in as evidence. So someone saying, thanks for your help with me on this particular project, and that goes in as an evidence. I actually don't think that's good enough, because I don't know then what that individual's actually done. I don't know how they're relating that to the decisions they've made about that piece of work. It's a nice to have, but it doesn't actually evidence their practice. So evidence is something that I'm getting. I think probably it's probably overtaking for me reflection in terms of something I'm more concerned about portfolios recently. And I don't quite know why that is at the moment, but it's something to watch out for. Sarah, go for it.
I couldn't find the hand raise
I,
thing.
I can never find it in Zoom,
I
so
just put
just
my
go for it.
actual hand up. Just going back to your comment about email, because obviously I run a
Mm,
cohort, so I'm pushing candidates through CMALT every year, and
yeah,
we do include email. But actually, would an email testimonial be better, where they invite the person to say, "Thank you for your help on this thing that I did. It was
yeah.
blah, and I couldn't have done it without you." So it's not just a very like one sentence, but it's a bit more. So I'm thinking more testimonial. Would you be happy with that?
It's got to be really clear what that person has done.
Yeah,
So, and on its own, it probably doesn't. Let's say you're using email as an evidence for 1B, which is the technical capability. It's not going to be good enough.
sure.
But it would be very good for example, section 4 on working with others.
Yeah,
If that email includes why,
yeah.
why,
Why?
why is that person grateful for that input? What did that candidate actually do?
Mhm.
And what was the impact? And that's really useful. But use them sporadically. Don't
Mhm.
use them for every single section, which, yeah, this is something it's got to be tied to the section that it needs to be tied to. And then each section, so 1A, 1B, 1C, and so forth, is marked as either strong, adequate, or revisions required. And the definitions are there. This is where the subjectivity comes in between strong and adequate. So I always see that strong is you can't possibly evidence this any better than we go from extremes sometimes when we're marking. It's like you really have a high bar for strong, but I don't think we need to be. Um, this is about looking objectively at, is it well documented? Is it clear? Is it convincing? Do I really get a sense that this person knows their stuff and is able to articulate that in their portfolio? And again, I have to remind myself, this is all about how this is articulated in a portfolio. It's not about assessing the individual person. This is not a job interview. It's not a CV. It's have they articulated their practice, and have they done it really well? That's a strong. If they've ticked off the criteria essentially on the guidance, that's probably inadequate. There's probably room for growth. Um, but it's still credible. Revisions required is if any of those, description, evidence, or reflection, just isn't good enough, or it's missing, or it's not actually convincing. We're working on some rubric at the moment to help with this too. It'll probably come out in a few months, but it's something that we know we need to do a bit more support on for assessors. So I mentioned that each one of these areas has different criteria, as you'll know. So again, just watch out to make sure that every section that's needed is in there. And then each one of these will have their own grade against them as strong, adequate, or revisions required. So I won't go through that in too much detail because you should know that by now. And it's in the guidance. It's much easier to remember it with the guidance. This bit, this is the bit that I'm really most interested in, which is the core principles and values of CMALT. And this is a holistic assessment across the portfolio about whether this candidate is demonstrating the professional attributes that we expect from a CMALT holder. And each one of these also has a strong, adequate, or revisions required against it. And so what you're looking at here is, are they demonstrating these principles through what they do? And all four are required. And I think this is why it makes CMALT such a strong certification, because it's not just about what you've done in practice, but how have you demonstrated these professional values throughout your practice. So you can actually have a portfolio that's got adequate all the way through all the different sections, but doesn't show any engagement with other colleagues, or is using technology that's 10 years out of date and hasn't actually looked and explored more recent learning technologies. And therefore they can't pass because they haven't demonstrated these values. Absolutely. These are really key to, just picking on your point in the chat, these are really key to highlight in your portfolio. And actually, when you look at, there's a good opportunity in the specialist areas, and certainly in the advanced area of the senior portfolio, to actually have these as headings. And if I was writing a portfolio and encouraging people to write portfolio, I'd put these in the specialist and advanced area exactly how you're demonstrating these. You can't go wrong then. So essentially, we're not assessing people as an individual, whether we, and this is actually really important, whether we approved of how they went about doing something. There are lots of portfolios where I probably wouldn't have taken the same approach as someone else, but I'm also not in their working context. There are constraints that I may not be aware of, and we may have different experience and different knowledge that are informing our decisions. So we're not judging whether someone's doing something, for want of a better description, the right way or the wrong way. We're assessing how well they are articulating what they've done in line with the guidelines and the principles. It's such an important thing to remember throughout. The senior CMALT is not about seniority either. You can do senior CMALT, demonstrate leadership, demonstrate impact, and this might be, first 3 years in your career. It's really, this is all about tying it to the criteria that's in the guidance and detaching yourself from the person a little bit, actually, and thinking about the portfolio, marking the portfolio. Excuse the dog barking in the background. I might just let him out so that, spare with me a second. Sorry about that. Always at the most ridiculous time. Anyway, right. Is the slides back on? I think I might have done something weird with it. Anyway, where am I going next? All right, on to yes, on the other side, depth and quality of reflection. I've got some examples, and I think that's probably worth just looking at a bit later on, where, to really get a sense of, has someone reflected enough? And I think actually, if we just discuss those examples, that's probably the best thing to do there because it's the only other way I can think of describing it. There in the guidance for CMALT, there are some reflective prompts that we give candidates, and typically, if I can see that they're using those reflective prompts, that's a good sign. If they reflect on the sector, so they're doing a commentary on the sector, that's not a reflection of their professional practice. So it has to be a reflection on them in their professional role. One thing that's not on this slide, which I think I probably need to add, is that context statement as well at the beginning. Definitely spend time reading that context statement because that helps get your head into some of the justifications and some of the reflections. Just gives you, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many different people, so many different roles that we have through CMALT. That context statement is so helpful. So definitely spend some time on that. Something that's come in over the last couple of years is also the ethical considerations, and obviously the framework for ethical use of learning technology that ALT has is a really useful framework that candidates can use to demonstrate that they are thinking ethically about their use of learning technology. It's one of those lines that's in the criteria that's often missed. It's not one of those check boxes that we've got in the form, but it is something that we're expecting to see. Now, this I think comes down to, well, we probably need to do a bit of an update of the criteria then, and this is why this is kind of missing. But it is in the guidance now that we expect to see some engagement with ethical considerations, and it can come through really well in the wider context section. It can also come through in quite often in the deployment section, so 1C, and in the working with others. And obviously, there's lots of scope there in an advanced area too. Right. Is anyone doing no one's doing senior CMALT, are you, at the moment? So we can skip over this. I would just say on senior CMALT, the key thing anyway is about leadership and impact. And it's not about seniority and position. It's about, are you able to demonstrate leadership and impact? That could be through research, it could be through management, but actually more often than not, particularly when you're a learning technologist, maybe you've got a number of years under your belt, or more relevantly, I suppose, a range of experience under your belt, the decisions and the way you're influencing colleagues, the way you're influencing your institution and the way you're influencing the sector gives you some good evidence base for senior CMALT. So that's really what we're looking at here, is that senior CMALT is about that wider impact and that influence. And that really the complexity of thinking that's brought into that profession. Anyway, I won't go into too much of that because I know we're not looking at them at the moment. So feedback. You will have all received feedback from your portfolios at some point. And you will probably thought, I really wish this was much clearer. And this guidance is good for that. So when I'm writing my feedback, it's typically more than a few sentences per section, because I want to be very specific in terms of where improvement is needed, but also what they're doing right in terms of the guidelines. So don't change this bit. This bit works really well. It's this bit I really want you to focus on. So again, thinking about the candidate, how much time they've already invested into the portfolio, how much time we're expecting them to make any changes to get above that threshold of acceptance. This is where the feedback is critical. If you write too much feedback, you're diluting that focus, you're diluting that message. If you don't write enough, then there's too much scope there for the candidate to go away and come back with something that still doesn't hit the mark. So you've almost got to step out of it a little bit and reread your feedback before you submit and think, okay, as a candidate, do I know what I'm expected to do now? So I would always provide feedback for each subsection. Don't just do feedback over the whole portfolio. The portfolios are too big. It's not going to help the candidate. So each subsection works really well. Point out the examples of things that are working well, things that aren't. I also typically look at the portfolio quite holistically, where maybe there's a section in 1C that would be better in section 4. So if section 4 is not strong enough, maybe there's an example in 1C that I've just counted forward in section 4, and I say, look, I've marked your section 4 as adequate because you did a really strong 1C that's got the element I'm looking for section 4. So I've kind of explained how I've got to my scores, even if everything's adequate. Um, the reason why I do that is if the candidate's then publishing their portfolio, I would say, if you're publishing this, please can you move this into section 4 so that if anyone else is looking at it as an example, they understand how that's got that grade. Because if you looked at it otherwise, it wouldn't do. So there's a bit of rationale that I give in there in terms of how I'm reviewing the portfolio as well, which I think can be quite helpful, particularly in those cases of publishing. I always talk about I actually do use the language of you. I say, you've done there's a nice example here where I try and avoid well, yeah, I try and avoid using talking about their personal individual self. I talk about their practice and how they've evidenced in the portfolio. So I always come from the point of view of this person is trying to be the best they can be in their profession. Assume that to begin with, and it's just about how they've articulated it in their portfolio that may not be sufficient. So that's the lens I'm trying to use here in terms of how I'm writing feedback in a respectful and constructive tone. It's acknowledging that they probably do have all the experience, but I just need you to articulate it in the portfolio in a clearer way. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Assessment outcomes. There are 4, it appears. The distinction one is where you've got strong grades across the portfolio. Normally, if you've got like 2 or 3 adequates and most of them are strong, that's a clear distinction. And again, this is where a little bit of subjectivity comes in here in terms of, doesn't need to be strong in every single section, but is there enough there? Pass is obviously if every section passes. Refer or minor revisions is if there's normally a couple of sections that just need some improvement. Major revisions is if they really do need to look at maybe the whole structure of the portfolio, look at a lot of their examples, or if there are more than a couple of sections that need changes, that's a major revisions. And that difference between minor and major is just to give the candidate a bit of calibration on terms of the amount of effort they're going to need to put in to make changes. Sometimes there might even be a section there's just portfolio is fine throughout. There's just one section that isn't quite there. I have to ask myself, is it really worth going back to them and saying, "Oh, could you just change that couple of sentences?" And the answer is normally no. If holistically, I can see that they're demonstrating the values of CMALT very clearly, and there's just that one section that isn't quite off, they're still a good candidate. They're still evidencing the values. I would normally pass that. For any referral, which is essentially invitation to resubmission, there's then these choices. Again, we've got distinction, we've got pass, and then it's a fail. Wherever we can, we avoid failing people because again, this is about development. This is about, supporting individuals in their practice. And before we get to a fail, if I'm able to, I would probably go back to the candidate myself and try and see where we can go with them. I think in 13 years, 12, 13 years of assessing, I think there's only been one fail that's come across my desk where they've not actually made any changes based on the feedback. So not re-engaged with the process as a relevant process. Most candidates will pass. We really want more people to pass first time as well. We really do. Okay, peer review. I've essentially I've gone through some of this. We don't have the sophisticated form system that we had previously. So you will be receiving an email with a link to the portfolio and a link to a Google form to provide your feedback. So this is an email that literally I received this week. Instead of using the old system, we're using a Google form to collect the feedback. If you can't do the work in the 4 weeks, please let CMALT team know so that they can reallocate the portfolio. It's really important that, because otherwise it just gets stuck in the system. The Google form looks like this. It's a form, it's got sections, and it's got the choices for each section of strong, adequate, revisions, incomplete, or not applicable. Now, not applicable will probably be if it's I don't know why it'd be not applicable. To be honest, it might be missing, or it might be, well, no, because missing's there. So maybe it's a section that we don't need for that particular portfolio, but I think they've done something clever with the form anyway that means you should only see what you need to see. So I'm not quite sure that's anyway. It's there if you need it. Use that with the grades, and then there'll be a box at the end for your feedback. So if essentially that gives the opportunity to say, oh, this bit was missing evidence, or can you improve this reflection, or whatever the feedback you want to put in there. Gone through that already. There's also a section there on the 4 core principles. Each one of those has got strong, adequate, revisions required, or missing. And then there'll be a section at the end, which I haven't got a screenshot of. This is the old one, but essentially where you choose which of the grades of that portfolio is. So you just follow the form. As I mentioned, I'd structure feedback by each section, but I would also do all this offline, essentially. Use a Word doc, use a Google Doc, whatever you want to use to write your scores and narrative out, and then transfer it to the Google form when you're ready. There have been multiple occasions when I've been trying to do this, and I've got their portfolio up. I've got multiple windows all over the place, and yeah, the form gets closed by accident. So definitely have a separate document. Once it gets submitted, somehow, and I don't quite know how this will operate at the moment with the email and Google Form route, but somehow you'll get the feedback back from the other assessor, and you'll be asked to compare. So I'm assuming it's going to operate very similar to what we had previously, where you get to see your scores and the other assessor scores, and then you get to confirm your assessment. Now, before you hit submit on, or before you send back your assessment, after seeing the other person's scores, this is the point where you need to get together. Now, you'll get the details of the other assessor, so you can send them an email and say, thanks for your assessment. I've compared. And what I would normally do here is saying that these are the sections that I think we differ. Before I've done that, I've probably gone through and just sense checked myself. Have I been too harsh? Have I been too lenient? And I might make some changes myself. And I'd list those changes out. And I say, look, I've seen your feedback. I've had a look through mine. I'm going to make these changes because of your feedback. That's been really useful to help me calibrate. There are still some sections that I would like to discuss. Basically, I don't agree with you. And can we just get together and talk about that? Now, I love doing that on a half-hour Teams call or whatever. If not, it's just by email, and give my reasons why I think something is or isn't the grade it needs to be. Such a valuable part of the process, though. So go through that process before you then give your final submissions. Because if you submit, one assessor will pass, another assessor will refer, it's going to come to a third assessor. Sometimes that's me. So try and find a mutual ground before that. Anna, you said you had an experience as well. I'll pause recording, should we say, and then we can look at that as well, and in terms of what that experience was like. So the joint feedback would then go back, and this is what I mean about having that feedback aligned. You want that both assessors to send the same aligned feedback as much as possible. Obviously, there'll be differences, but you don't want to send the candidate off in different paths. And then assessment's complete, and candidate will have a chance to celebrate or resubmit. Right, I'm going to stop recording now. I've got a couple of examples here, and just for the purpose of recording, there is obviously further guidance on the CMALT website, and if you need any help at any point during the CMALT process, just email, and someone will come back to you. So I'm going to stop recording now, and then we can have some questions and anything else.